At 2:14 a.m., my bank app lit up minus $36,842.19. No warning, no apology, just gone. It was 1 week before my 30th birthday. And it wasn't strangers. It was family. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about stolen money. It's about what happens when the quiet one finally fights back without raising her voice. It was 2:14 a.m. when the alert came. A vibration on my nightstand, a soft single buzz that shouldn't have meant anything. But when I blinked awake and turned the screen over, the number froze me. Bank alert, withdrawal, $36, 842.19. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stared. Not with confusion, no, it was something colder. Like the air had been sucked from the room. My breath hitched. I sat up slowly, the sheets still tangled around my waist, and stared at the screen like it might explain itself. 36, 842.19, not a typo, not a delay, not a glitch, gone. All of it. Everything I'd saved since I graduated, since I moved out, since I took on 2 jobs to clear my student loans early. I used to joke I was saving for peace. That's what I called it, peace money. Funny how peace evaporates with a ping. I didn't cry. That surprised me. There were no tears, no gasps, just this spreading, sinking stillness, like standing in a room after a bomb has gone off and realizing the walls are still standing, but something inside you isn't. I climbed out of bed slowly, almost afraid the floor might not hold me. I wrapped a hoodie around my shoulders, not for warmth, but to stop my hands from shaking, and walked barefoot into the kitchen. I didn't turn on the light, just opened my laptop and signed into my bank account. The transactions were there, lined up in neat betrayal mortgage payments, medical bills, a down payment on a used truck, groceries, utilities, a credit card I didn't know I was attached to. I sat down hard on the tile. All the names were familiar. Family. And the thing is, part of me had known. Not consciously, maybe, but in the way you know a storm is coming before the sky turns. It was 3 days before my 30th birthday. Last week, my mom had called asking how work was going. My dad had texted, "Proud of you, kid." My brother had sent a random meme. At the time, I thought it was sweet. I didn't know it was a smokescreen. I tapped my dad's contact and hit call. It rang 4 times before he answered on speaker. I could hear voices in the background, laughter, clinking glasses, the echo of music in a high-ceilinged room. My mother's voice was unmistakable. "Hey, sweetheart, what's up?" he said, sounding winded. "There's a problem with my account," I said. My voice was low, even. "It's been emptied. Almost 37,000 gone." Silence. Then the party faded a little as he stepped away. "Oh," he said. "Just that. Oh, I mean, yeah, we used some of it. The family needed help. Your mom had surgery. Your brother's truck died. We were behind on the mortgage. You know how it is." "You didn't ask," I whispered. He scoffed, almost insulted. "Why would we ask? You owe this family everything. We raised you, clothed. You gave you everything. It's just money, Riley." I felt something shift inside me, then subtle like the hairline crack in glass before it splinters. "You should have told me." Then came her voice, my mother's, bright, sharp, tinged with that tone she used when she wanted to sound amused but couldn't quite hide the disdain. "Oh, come on, Riley. Don't be so sensitive. What were you going to do with it anyway? Buy yourself a cake and some candles. We used it better than you would have." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was absolute. And in that moment, something died in me. Not love exactly. Not hope. Just expectation. That they would treat me with care. That they saw me as a person, not a resource. I exhaled. A slow, steady release of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. "Then don't ever call me again," I said. There was a stutter on the line, a laugh, confusion, but I was already hanging up. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't scream into the void. I walked back to my room, opened my financial files, and began the quiet, meticulous process of dismantling every pipeline they had ever accessed. Bank accounts, credit cards, auto pays, insurance policies, authorization forms, Co-signed loans. Every door. Closed. They thought because I was responsible, I was theirs. They thought my success meant they had a lifetime claim on it. They thought love meant access. But that night, I became something else. Not their fixer, not their daughter, not their safety net. I became a firewall. And I remembered something my dad once said years ago when I was 17. Family doesn't need to ask. He meant it as a compliment. I now knew it was a warning. That silence after I hung up was their final gift to me, and I returned it, not with rage, not with revenge, but with complete, irreversible detachment. Quietly, but permanently. I was 12 when I realized I wasn't just a daughter. I was a solution. It was winter and the electricity bill was due. I remember the notice taped to our door, red letters, urgent and humiliating. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she held the slip. I stood across from her, still in my school uniform, holding a math test I'd passed with a perfect score. She didn't look at it. She didn't even ask about my day. She just started to cry. "I don't know what we're going to do," she whispered, barely audible over the refrigerator's wheeze. "I can't let them shut off the heat. Not again." I remember how that sentence lodged itself inside me like a command. The next day I swept hair at a salon down the street. After school, after homework, after childhood. I brought home $60 that Friday. Gave it to her, folded, silent. She cried again. This time with relief. From then on it became a rhythm. She'd panic, I'd fix. They'd fall short, I'd fill the gap. No one said it directly, but I could read between their silences. My job wasn't just to grow up, it was to hold them together. As I got older, they started calling me the responsible one. When I landed my first real job, they said, "You're our miracle." At Christmas, they'd toast to me, to Riley, who always comes through. I used to feel proud. I used to think that kind of love was earned. But here's the thing. No one tells you when the love is conditional. You don't learn how to feel safe. You learn how to perform. And I was a performer. I paid the water bills, the overdue credit card, the vet bill for the family dog I didn't even name. When my little brother wrecked his second car, I co-signed for the next one. My parents said, "He's just lost." You were never like that. You were always strong, reliable, the savior, the ATM with a heart. I didn't know I was bleeding until I stopped to count the wounds. On my 25th birthday, I'd planned something quiet, a bookstore trip, dinner alone with a good bottle of wine. I'd finally saved enough for a treat. But when I got home that afternoon, my mother was standing in the living room holding up a dress. Cream silk, a designer tag still attached. "I bought this for you," she beamed. "You'll look beautiful in it tonight." Something didn't feel right. It wasn't my size, it wasn't my style. But she looked so proud. I smiled. I thanked her. Later that night, I checked my bank account. The charge was there. She'd used my card. She didn't ask. She never mentioned it. It wasn't a gift. It was a transaction disguised as affection. A sleight of hand wrapped in tissue paper. And still I said nothing. Because by then I understood what I was to them, not a person, but a plan. Not a daughter, but a backup fund. I thought that was love. I didn't know better. I grew up in a house where love had invoices, where affection came with a tally, where guilt was currency and gratitude was expected even when your bones were being ground into loans. I only started to question it when I moved out and noticed how light I felt, like I'd been carrying bricks that weren't mine, like I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. But even then the guilt lingered, even when they forgot my birthday the following year, even when they called only to ask for help, even when I heard my mom say to her friend, "Riley's doing well. We're lucky to have her. She always picks up the slack." The slack. Like I was a rope, like I was something to pull. It took therapy to name what I'd lived through: conditional love, emotional parentification, financial exploitation masked as family loyalty. But the truth is simpler. I wasn't loved for who I was. I was loved for what I could provide. And that isn't love. It's need. It's convenience. It's training someone to bleed on cue. I used to think boundaries were cruel. that saying no would make me heartless, that withholding help would mean I'd failed them. Now I know better. Now I know I was a child playing the role of savior in a family that mistook dependence for devotion. They didn't mean to break me, but they never tried not to either. The morning after the $36,000 vanished, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call them back. Instead, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and clicked forgot password on every account I had ever shared. The stillness was loud. It had weight to it, like a weighted blanket you weren't sure brought comfort or suffocation. I started with my bank, then my credit cards, mortgage, insurance, phone bill, streaming services, auto payments. One by one, I uncovered the map of my own slow erosion. They didn't just take my money, they used my name, the mortgage in my name. My mother's credit had never recovered from her last bankruptcy, and I'd been the adult since 21. They asked me to sign just temporarily to help them keep the house. The truck my brother drove mine, too. I remembered the day he called me sobbing, begging. I had just gotten promoted. He said, "Please just co-sign. I'll never miss a payment." He missed the first one, then the third. After that, I just paid it myself because it was faster than the fight. There was a medical bill I didn't recognize. I Googled the provider, a hospital near their home. Emergency surgery, paid in full, under my health insurance, of course. There were 3 credit cards I had forgotten about. I'd been added as an authorized user to build their limits. I was building a castle for everyone but myself. The utilities, the Netflix, the Amazon Prime, all linked to my debit. I stared at the Excel sheet I'd opened, each row, a piece of myself I hadn't consented to give away. A timeline of quiet betrayals charged in monthly statements. I named the sheet History. Healing. I've learned sometimes starts with a spreadsheet. I made notes. Color-coded blue for bills. I paid red for things I never authorized. Yellow for emotional blackmail, because yes, even that needed tracking. Notes like April 2020. Mom cried, said if I didn't pay the dentist, she'd lose her teeth. June 2021. Dad said if I didn't send money for rent, they'd be homeless. December 2022. Birthday gift, $0. Instead, they bought themselves a TV. It sounds bitter now. At the time, it felt like survival. But now I wasn't surviving anymore. I was documenting. I was preparing. Not for war, but for separation, permanent and legal. I called Jenny. Jenny had been my college roommate. She was now a lawyer who specialized in financial detanglement. Yes, that's a real thing, especially in cases of divorce or familial exploitation. I didn't even know that term existed before this. She did. And when I emailed her the file, she didn't say, "This is too much," or "Are you sure?" She said, "It's about time." We started with the bank. Fraud claims, paper trails, authorization revokes. Then legal notices for accounts I had never agreed to be on. We submitted documents that proved coercion. Statements with timestamps. Voicemails where they admitted using my name because hers wasn't good enough. The house. We filed a quitclaim and prepared for foreclosure. My mother had always said, "It's our house. You're just the name on paper." Now she'd get to prove that in court. The car, repossessed. My brother texted, "WTF happened?" I didn't reply. I changed my passwords, froze my credit, filed identity misuse reports, even filed a quiet complaint with my insurance. Turns out, sharing your login for unauthorized procedures can constitute fraud. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to remove myself from a fire they kept lighting with my matches. One of the hardest things was pulling my name off the family phone plan. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I realized how many things they linked to me without asking. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as you're the responsible one, so it makes sense if the bills go through you. That line had kept me trapped for 15 years. Not anymore. Jenny and I drafted a legal separation not just from financial entanglements, but from power of attorney, shared debts, liability, exposure. I didn't know until then that you could legally revoke familial access the same way you'd sever a business partnership. It wasn't revenge, it was a boundary written in black and white. I even had a folder on my desktop titled Final Exit Documents. It held scanned copies of every contract, every statement, every email where I had begged for accountability and been ignored. I didn't feel angry anymore, just clean. They had taken from me without shame, without asking, without apology. Now I was taking back everything that was mine. There were moments where I almost felt sorry, like when I saw a missed call from Mom or a payment failed notice from a shared account. But then I'd open the Excel sheet again, scroll to the rows that screamed in numbers what I never said aloud. $36, $842, 19. And that was just the total from that month. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the assumption that I was born to be broken open again and again to keep them comfortable. That assumption was over. One day I stared at the spreadsheet, then added a final row. It didn't have a number, it just said, I do not owe anyone the cost of my own peace. And that was the first entry of a new chapter I was writing, where I was no longer their provider. I was the protagonist of my own story. It started quietly. I stopped paying Mom's car note. That car, the one she used to pick up her friends to brag about how her daughter pays for everything, vanished from the driveway in the middle of the night. Repossessed. A week later, her phone was disconnected. It was under my family plan. I'd canceled it. No warning, no farewell text, just silence. The same kind they had given me every time I begged them to stop treating me like a wallet. Then it was Dad's turn. His supplementary credit card tied to mine was declined at the gas station. He left me a voicemail, his voice seething with rage. Are you serious, Riley? What the hell kind of daughter just shuts her father off after everything we've done for you? You think you're better than us now? I didn't listen to the rest. I had heard that tone before. Entitlement wearing the mask of betrayal. The kind of voice that demands access not because it's earned, but because it's expected. They had always believed they were entitled to me, that I owed them a lifetime subscription to my labor, my name, my credit, my silence. But not anymore. I had started drawing a line, and now I was carving it in stone. 2 days later, they came to my home. It was a Sunday morning. I was in the middle of folding laundry when I heard the pounding at the front door. Loud, unrelenting. I walked to the peephole slowly, heart steady. I already knew who it was. Dad was pacing the porch like he paid the mortgage, red-faced arms flailing, phone in one hand. Mom stood beside him in her usual leopard print cardigan, crying, but loud enough for drama, not grief. Riley, she yelled, open this door. You're acting crazy. You're ruining everything I said. Nothing. I didn't move. I just watched. Dad pounded again. You ungrateful little... How could you do this to your family? We trusted you. Trusted me. As if I was the one who emptied their accounts. As if I had burned the bridge they'd been mining for years. They stayed for 10 minutes, shouting, pleading, threatening. And I let them. Because I had nothing left to give, not even my presence. I was done being the fixer. I was now the firewall. I sat on the couch and poured myself a cup of coffee out of the mug they bought me 2 birthdays ago. It said #1 daughter. Cute, right? It had always been their joke, their reminder that I was the golden child until I stopped shining for their benefit. As the doorbell finally fell silent, I opened my laptop. I had already been working with Jenny, my lawyer, on financial disassociation. But now it was time for the last step. The email subject line read, Final Cut. Inside, I gave Jenny the green light to proceed with the full revocation of every tie, power of attorney revoked, family phone plan terminated, credit authorizations blocked, joint liabilities notified and separated, healthcare proxy withdrawn. There would be no legal access, no emotional loophole, no lingering obligations. I wasn't just setting boundaries. I was building walls out of documentation. A firewall protects the system not to punish the hacker, but to preserve what remains. I was preserving me. That night, my phone lit up like a wildfire. Messages from unknown numbers. Angry, then desperate, then sweet. Mom, please call. Your father's not sleeping. He's worried sick. Dad, this is how you treat us. After all we gave you? The final one read, You were never this cold before. What happened to you? I stared at it for a long time. Then I answered. I finally learned how to protect myself. Blocked. Their voices faded into digital nothingness. And I didn't cry. I just sat there wrapped in a blanket sipping coffee in a home that was quiet. Not because someone left me, but because I finally stayed with myself. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had stopped letting them hurt me. The voicemail came at 7:42 p.m. I saw the missed call. First, Mom. No caller ID followed by a notification. New voicemail. 1 minute 47 seconds. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering. My hand was trembling. I hadn't heard her voice in months, not since I blocked every number they used. But they always found a way, burner phones, cousins, concerned friends. This one, it broke through. I pressed play. Riley, it's your mom. Your dad? He fell. Broke his leg. We're at County Hospital and they won't operate without partial payment up front. He doesn't have insurance anymore. Her voice cracked. I know you're upset, but this is serious. This is family. Please just call back. 3 minutes. That's all we're asking. 3 minutes. The silence at the end of the recording was louder than her plea. I sat down slowly on the floor, the phone still warm in my hand, as if it had carried the heat of her voice with it, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My body remembered things I didn't want to recall. The way she hugged me the day I signed the mortgage for her house because her credit wouldn't allow it. She cried into my shoulder. You're saving us again, she whispered. I had believed her. I had always believed that one more loan, one more favor, one more sacrifice would finally make them see me not as a resource but as a daughter. But now, sitting there in my own apartment, rent paid by me, lights on, because of me, my chest felt heavy again. Not from guilt, from memory. That same chest had held the pressure of their financial disasters since I was a teenager. Every bounced check, every late notice, every time they made me feel like the oxygen they breathed was bought with my credit score. And now, they wanted another piece of me. I stood up and walked to my desk, opened my laptop, clicked into a folder labeled History. Inside, screenshots of unauthorized charges, copies of autopay accounts I never approved, bank statements with withdrawals I didn't remember making. The photo of the overdraft notice from the morning of my 30th birthday, and then at the bottom, a subfolder called The Mortgage. Inside, a scanned copy of the deed. My name on the loan. Not hers, mine. She'd promised it was just a technicality. I remembered that promise more than I remembered the hug. I opened a spreadsheet next, labeled Peace Fund. I had started it the week after I cut them off. A quiet goal one day, I'll have saved enough to choose peace over pain, no matter the crisis. Tonight it had enough. I wrote a check. Not to the hospital, not to her, to myself, a deposit into that fund. Into the version of me that doesn't get pulled back into the flames just because someone shouts family like a fire alarm. I didn't return the call. I didn't text back. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence: I will not bleed again to bandage the wounds they refuse to treat. I turned off my phone. That night, I sat on the balcony with tea and a blanket wrapped in the softness I used to believe only came from being needed. I wasn't heartless. I was healing. And healing sometimes means walking away even when your heart still remembers how to sprint toward the fire. The first thing I did was change my phone number. Not because I hated them, though hate would have been easier, but because I needed a quiet that couldn't be interrupted. No voicemails, no pleading messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, no guilt-drenched texts masked as concern, just silence. I closed every joint account, opened new ones in my name only. Got a new email, new passwords, even a new mailing address. Then I found it my apartment. Small, 2 bedrooms, one window that faced the sunset. It smelled like paint and possibility. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't what they would brag about on Facebook, but it was mine. No one co-signed it. No one leveraged it for emergencies. It was the first space I had ever lived in that wasn't borrowed, inherited, or tethered to someone else's survival. I painted the walls soft sage green, hung up fairy lights I bought on clearance, picked out mismatched furniture from secondhand stores, and watched them bloom in my space like wildflowers. I bought the lavender-scented soap Mom used to hate, put a lock on the door that only I had the key to. My name on the lease, my name on the bills, my name on the peace. The first few nights were the hardest. Silence can be deafening after years of noise. After decades of being the emotional fire extinguisher for every family crisis, stillness felt foreign. But then something shifted. One morning, I opened the window and realized I was no longer bracing for yelling from the other room. I was no longer sleeping with my phone under my pillow, waiting for the next crisis call. I didn't jump at every notification. Instead, I sipped coffee in stillness. That stillness became a kind of sanctuary, and I started to breathe in a way I hadn't since I was 12. I wrote again, longhand, in journals, with tea stains on the corners and margin notes in blue ink. I made playlists for cleaning, one for cooking, one for crying, though I didn't need it often. I started to become someone I might have liked if I'd met her earlier. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It startled me. No one knocked anymore. I peeked through the peephole and saw her Ava, my cousin, the only one who'd ever really seen me even before the mess. She held a small cake white frosting smeared slightly on the lid. I opened the door before she could knock again. She didn't cry or ask questions. She just walked in, put the cake on the counter, and hugged me like she meant it. "I didn't know if you'd open the door," she said softly. "Me neither," I replied. We sat on the floor, legs crossed like kids eating cake with spoons straight from the container. She looked around my tiny, imperfect apartment, then smiled. "You weren't the problem," she said. "You were just the first to escape." That sentence, it cracked something open in me. Because for years I had carried the shame they handed me. I had believed I was the cold one, the selfish one, the traitor to the tribe. But now I realized I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was becoming myself. The invitation came in a cream envelope with gold foil edges and Ava's looping cursive. I knew I'd go before I even opened it. Ava was getting married, and despite everything, the fallout, the silence, the severed ties, I wouldn't miss it. She had been the one thread that held, even when everything else unraveled. But I also knew who else would be there. My parents. They'd walk in wearing the masks they always did her, in a dress she couldn't afford, him limping for sympathy like his injury was a punishment instead of a pattern. They'd tell everyone I had changed, that I was cold, distant, broken. And they wouldn't be wrong. I had changed. But not in the way they wanted others to believe. I chose a black satin dress. Not to mourn, but to declare an ending. It was simple, elegant, unapologetic. The kind of dress that made you invisible to guilt, but impossible to ignore. I walked into the venue alone, head high, shoulders soft. Smile easy, not forced, not fake. The air was thick with perfume and anticipation. The hum of old relatives and friends catching up, the clink of champagne glasses, and the scent of buttercream frosting. And then I felt it. The shift. Their eyes. My parents were across the room, frozen for just a second too long. That pause people take when the version of you they imagined doesn't match the one who walks in. They didn't approach me, but they didn't need to. Their gaze followed me like old debt. I didn't flinch. I hugged Ava, handed her a small, velvet-wrapped box, and whispered, "You look like joy." She smiled through tears. "I'm so glad you came." Later during the dinner, I sat with some of Ava's college friends. We laughed about things I didn't understand, shared appetizers, passed wine. I felt present. Not waiting, not performing, just existing in peace. Then during the toasts, I felt movement beside me. A hand rested lightly on the back of my chair. I turned. It was her. My mother. Dressed in leopard print, holding a glass of white wine she probably didn't pay for. "You look different," she said quietly, eyes scanning me like a stranger. I met her eyes. Steady. "I did change," I said. "I'm here for Ava, not you." Her mouth opened slightly, as if rehearsing a response she didn't quite believe in. I didn't give her the space to say it. I turned back to the table, lifted my glass, took a sip. She lingered for a moment, then faded into the crowd. No scene, no screams, just silence, and it was mine. That moment became more than just a conversation. It was a closing statement. Years of manipulation, guilt, emotional blackmail, all distilled into one quiet refusal. She had touched the edge of my world and realized she was no longer allowed in. And that was the loss she had to live with. Later, as the music pulsed and people began to dance, I joined them. Not because I was happy in the fairy tale way, but because I had earned the right to move freely again. Each step was a celebration, each laugh a small rebellion. When my father raised his glass during the final toast, I didn't look back, didn't acknowledge it. He expected some gesture, some silent truce, some daughterly obligation wrapped in a glance. But I gave him nothing, because peace doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means no longer letting what happened define how you show up. By the time the night ended, my feet ached from dancing. My voice was hoarse from laughter. And my heart, for the first time in years, felt unguarded, but unafraid. When I got home, I peeled off the black dress and hung it up carefully, not like armor, but like a memory, a symbol of the woman who didn't flinch. The folder sat on her desktop, untouched for weeks, maybe months. History. Riley named it during a night when pain demanded structure. When she needed the chaos to fit inside something measurable, rose dates, numbers. Because some heartbreaks don't bleed, they calculate. She clicked it open. Inside, screenshots of drained accounts. Photos of utility bills she paid for a house she hadn't stepped inside in over a year. Bank statements with transactions she never authorized but always cleaned up. Voicemails transcribed text messages, saved as PDFs, and every line item that ever made her doubt her sanity. Each file was a scar, and every scar had a name. There was the document showing the mortgage approval, her name on it, not her mother's, because Mom's credit wasn't good enough. Riley remembered how proud her parents looked when she co-signed. She also remembered the nausea. She clicked another folder inside the archive: loans. The truck title, the student loan deferments. Her father's second credit card, one she didn't even know about until it defaulted and they called her. Another click. Birthdays. Receipts from gifts she bought, vacations she funded, meals she hosted. A $400 charge for a party her mother said she deserved after everything she'd done for Riley. And then the folder that stung the deepest messages. Text after text of apologies that always circled back to requests. "We're sorry you're upset. We didn't mean to hurt you. But can you just send a little help this month?" Conditional love wrapped in digital punctuation. Riley's hand hovered over the keyboard. For a long moment she just stared. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply breathed. And then slowly, deliberately, she started deleting. Not in anger, not in vengeance, in release. One folder after another vanished. Loans, birthdays, messages. Each keystroke wasn't an act of erasure, it was an act of reclaiming space. Emotional, digital, mental. She didn't need the receipts anymore, not because they weren't real, but because she was done carrying them. These were no longer warnings or proof. They were weights. And Riley had grown strong enough to put them down. By the time she finished, only one file remained. A Word document titled Final Steps. She opened it. A letter she had drafted but never sent. Now she added the date. Today. And typed, "Please proceed with full disassociation. Revoke all financial ties, shared accounts, co-signed loans, utility authorizations. Close every account they ever touched. Permanently." She reread it. Once, twice. Then she clicked send. The email flew off into the digital distance, and with it so did years of weight she never agreed to carry. It wasn't that she had forgotten. She remembered everything, but for the first time those memories weren't chains, they were chapters. And she had reached the back cover. She closed her laptop, got up, lit a candle in the center of her small safe kitchen. The flame flickered against the window, reflecting a woman who no longer owed anyone her breakdown. Riley didn't wake up to flowers. There were no messages waiting, no missed calls from numbers she used to know by heart, no text saying happy birthday, kiddo. Not from her mother, not from her father. Just the soft hum of rain against the window and the silence of a phone that stayed still. She smiled. Not a wide, triumphant smile. A quiet one, the kind that comes after you've stopped bracing for disappointment. She slipped her feet into wool socks, padded into her kitchen, and poured a cup of coffee. The apartment smelled like lavender and cinnamon, her favorite scents both once banned in her childhood home because they gave Mom a headache. Today she lit a candle just because she wanted to. It was her 31st birthday. There were no plans, no grand gestures, just space, stillness. A day untouched by obligation. At 10:17 a.m., someone knocked on the door. She froze for a heartbeat. The old instinct still whispered, "What if it's them?" But she knew better now. Riley opened the door to find Ava standing there, soaked from the rain, holding a cake box with slightly smeared frosting and a candle tucked into her pocket. "Happy birthday," Ava said, breathless but glowing. "I didn't want you to forget you exist." Riley stepped aside, eyes already stinging. "You're the only one who remembers." Ava shook her head. "No, Riley. You're just the only one who ever mattered enough for me to show up." They didn't light the candle right away. Instead, they sat on the couch with mugs of tea, talking about everything and nothing. Books, whether a ridiculous coworker of Ava's who thought email signatures were legally binding. Eventually, Ava reached for the candle and set it in the center of the cake. She didn't sing, she didn't say make a wish. She said, "Let's just breathe this time." And they did. The two women sat in that rain-wrapped apartment and simply inhaled, exhaled, no pressure to perform, no one expecting them to pour from empty hands. Later, Riley stood by the window, half-frosted cake slice in hand, listening to the rain tapping like a lullaby. The pane was cracked open. The air was cold but kind. She wasn't waiting for a voicemail. She wasn't checking to see if someone had posted a guilt-trip status about missing her. She didn't even think to check. That was peace. Not joy on a pedestal, not a fireworks finale, just the absence of dread. Just knowing the door wouldn't knock for the wrong reasons anymore. "I used to dream," she said quietly to Ava, "of the birthdays they'd show up. With love, with apologies, with something real." Ava nodded, listening. But now Riley sipped her tea. "I don't want them to come. Because even if they did, I'm no longer who they'd recognize or control." There was a long silence, but not the kind that wounds. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket still warm from the dryer. Ava stood to leave just after dusk. Before she did, she turned back and said, "You know what the bravest thing is?" Riley raised an eyebrow. "Letting them live with their version of you, while you live in truth." Riley smiled again, this time with her whole face. That night, Riley sat down with her journal. Not to recount the pain, not to catalog losses, but to write something new. She scribbled, "I stopped chasing blood ties, I started choosing soul ties, and I finally learned boundaries aren't cruel. They're just the quietest kind of love." She closed the notebook, blew out the candle. And for the first time in her adult life, she didn't go to bed replaying everything she wished she'd said to them. She just slept. No guilt, no bracing, no waiting, just stillness, just freedom, just peace.